Imagine what our neighbors would think in 10 years from now, what kind of army is growing in the center of Europe in Germany.
Democracy or dictatorship? Which will prevail in the years to come? Institutions across Europe, the United States, and other democracies are being put to the test. The checks and balances they provide can help withstand sudden shocks, but the authoritarians have gained new momentum. From Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro, a former army captain and far-right candidate, best known for his nostalgia for Brazil's old military dictatorship, to Hungary's Viktor Orban and Italy's Matteo Salvini, the needle is starting to move. News that Germany's Angela Merkel is stepping down doesn't inspire much confidence either. And China's Xi Jinping has been busily consolidating power, but fear not, democracy does not go quietly into the night. Hi, I'm Ian Bremmer, and welcome to GZERO World. Today on the show, I'll talk about the future of those institutions and sit down with a man who knows a thing or two about democracy. He's Sigmar Gabriel. He was Germany's foreign minister and vice-chancellor, and is an outspoken member of the Bundestag. It's like the United States House of Representatives with a 2-beer minimum. And of course, I've got your puppet regime. But first, a word from the folks who help us keep the lights on.
Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
"30 years ago, the tide of history seemed to be turning towards democracy. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, America found itself without a rival. In China, people power forced a crisis in Tiananmen Square. Western Europe welcomed their Eastern brothers. But history had other plans. Today, liberal democracies are polarized. Both America and the European Union are more divided than at any point since World War II, much to Vladimir Putin's delight. And in China, a single leader has consolidated power on a scale not seen since Mao. Meanwhile, governments in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America have all again started flirting with their own authoritarian brands. Don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing that democracy is dying, but authoritarianism clearly has the momentum. A cadre of authoritarian-leaning leaders have emerged in places like Brazil and Hungary and Italy to complement those already in place in Russia, China, Turkey, and the Philippines. And these days, some are sounding a lot like U.S. President Donald Trump.
Chega de mentira, chega de fake news.
The biggest challenge comes from China. Many emerging economies now look to Beijing as their most important partner. And China is a bit more predictable. President Xi Jinping isn't threatening to tear up trade deals with allies, nor does the Chinese government have that pesky transition of power between Republicans and Democrats every few years. In short, Xi has more staying power than an American president. And then there's the challenge of technology. Yes, my fellow Luddites, technology, big data, and social media, once the bastion of pro-democratic movements like the Arab Spring, have now been turned against their users. In Syria, President Bashar al-Assad quickly began surveilling Facebook and the texts of its citizens to identify dissidents most likely to pose threats to his regime. The Saudis, it would turn out, were quick to do the same with their journalists. With the Russians, where do I even begin? But it was the Chinese who upped the ante the most. Their officials dominate the internet, and they use facial recognition technology to identify potential troublemakers. Democracy isn't doomed, technologies evolve. So can systems of government. The only problem is they're just not running at the same speed. Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, I was with them at dinner a couple months ago. Well, that's nice. I'm younger.
Inside there was an article how awful these guys are.
He didn't say what it's in the article. That's hilarious. Well, why would he care? Yes. Now for our interview. My guest today is a social democrat and leading German politician who says storm clouds are once again gathering over Europe. Here's the rest of my conversation with Sigmar Gabriel. Delighted to be here today with Sigmar Gabriel, the former foreign minister as well as Vice-Chancellor of Germany. Sir, thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me.
So you were there when the wall came down. Now walls are coming back up. How does it feel to be a German today?
To be honest, I grew up directly at the border to East Germany, at the fence directly there, and never felt insecure. I always had very feeling of to live in a very secure and safe country because we knew that there was NATO, there was the European Union, there were the US. When I was a soldier, I was also at the borderline. We had with a radar system to look if there will be an aggressive airplane coming from the East Germany. Of course, there was no aggression from there. We also didn't feel insecure. If you have been a soldier in Germany, sometimes during the night, somebody shouted you should go up, and then we call it NATO alert. Nobody thought that's a real NATO alert. It's something like a game. Because we knew the Russians will not come, because the Americans and NATO is here, and they will not risk to go on the risk of a next, maybe nuclear war. So we felt in this alliance of NATO and the US, we felt secure. By the way, of course, we criticized the Americans for a lot what they do in Vietnam and Chile. But on the other hand side, the United States was something like a North Pole for us. It sounds paradox that we were criticizing as young leftists what they do, but on the other hand side, we love the United States. It was an orientation in our life, and we knew without the United States and some others, we would live under the oppression of the successors of Hitler or Stalin. So it was astonishing for us when the Iron Curtain fell down. Some years ago, I have 3 daughters. One of them is now 30, then she was, I think, maybe 20 or 22. We went through Berlin. I showed her, look here. Here was the Berlin Wall. She was, really? There was a Berlin Wall? What a crazy idea to build a wall through the city. She couldn't imagine.
At 22, your daughter didn't know that?
She knew, but for her it was a...
It was a concept. It wasn't a real wall.
Concept. It was a concept, and she knew it because of her school and the education of the school, but she couldn't imagine that somebody could be so crazy in a nation where on the one side and the other side both were Germans, to build a war and to shoot to people if they would try to meet their relatives. So you see, only in half a generation, people could not imagine what's possible.
Do you think that Europe is too big in the sense that so many of these East European countries, the institutions are weaker? It's precisely where you're seeing the slip back into more nationalist perspectives that certainly feel more confrontational in orientation?
What would be the alternative? To let more countries out of the European Union?
A two-track Europe, as some people talk about.
To be honest, we have a two-track Europe because not every European member state is part of the currency union. We should prevent a situation where some member states have the feeling that they will be excluded, because we have some difficult neighbors in the European Union who love to test the European unity. But so, I mean, to be honest, what does Moscow, Beijing, and Washington have in common? In reality, they do not respect Europe. They respect Germany because of our economic strength, but Europe it's something which for them is, when the Chinese, they have this group, the Europeans call it 16 plus 1. There are member states and non-member states of Europe, European Union plus China. Do you know how the group is called in China?
What?
1 plus 16.
No, sure.
So they try, of course, to intervene. Russia tries to intervene in the Western Balkans.
They have the East European group that the Chinese have as well, which I know that the Germans do not take kindly to.
No, I told my former colleague, the foreign minister of China, that I accept the one China policy, but I would be happy if China would accept a one Europe policy.
So when we started talking before the interview, you told me that you were getting more concerned about where the world is heading right now. What is it that is worrying you the most?
The tendency that countries do not trust in multilateral agreements, the idea that only strong nations should transactional decide in which direction the world should go. I mean, the national security strategy of the United States was published, I think, at the beginning of the year, where they say strong nations should organize the world. Well, it's interesting that this is an idea Mr. Putin, Mr. Erdogan, Mr. Xi Jinping, they would agree on.
They support that.
They support that. That's
the Germans would not.
No, we should say, of course, nations are important. Nations should take responsibility. It's not all internationalized. There is something where nations are very much important. But what's necessary is to have an international atmosphere where the strength or the rule of law should be our fundamental idea, not the rule of the strongest.
Now, you have said that in a world of carnivores, you don't want Germany to be the last vegetarian at the table.
Yes.
What do you do about that?
There's an idea in Germany which makes Korea. The idea is we should be like Switzerland. Maybe Europe should be like Switzerland. Economically powerful, but a vegetarian in international politics.
No, you see the surveys of workers in Germany, and they feel pretty optimistic about their economic future. Of course, the feeling of the refugee crisis in Europe and in Germany, they feel very differently. Do you think that that is the principal sort of cause of breakdown or fragmentation that we've seen in the past years in the German party system?
I would say no, but it's a trigger. I mean, the first time people were scared about the political and economic elites were the financial crisis. I mean, what did we say to our workers, to the ordinary citizens since 30 years? First, globalization is fine for everybody. We will have a trickle-down effect. And when they ask us, what's about our school system? You should invest more. Or what's about my pension, my wage? We always said, look, we are in a global competition. Unfortunately, it's not possible to do this. Now, we do not have enough money. We have to be careful because of the global competition. Then they, overnight, they saw that we were able to mobilize around 500 billion euros to stabilize the banking system.
After 2008.
After 2008. And then people ask us for the first time, what are you doing there? Why it was not possible to give me a fair pension after 40, 50 years working in 4 shifts in a factory or in a hospital?
When you could bail out the German banks.
Yes, when you could bail out the German banks. What do? Then some years later, they always asked us, what's about my pension? Why the school is so old? Why we do not have enough teachers? Why we do not have enough policemen on the street? We always answered, you know, we are again in a competition. It's difficult. We have to lower our debts and so on and so forth. And overnight, they saw we were able to mobilize 40 billion euros for around 1 million refugees coming in. And so during the last election campaign, 2017, I often heard the question, what's about my personal economic situation? Why do you do nothing for me and you do everything for the refugee? And then you can try to explain 2 hours why it's not true, or were very much in distance to the political elites. And at the end of the day, we had the split off on the conservative side of the Alternative for Germany, which is a right-wing populist party.
It feels like this notion of a centrist grand coalition that has the answers no longer really functions as well. So it sounds like you're saying the future of German politics is increasingly going to be on the left and on the right.
In Germany, if you look what is left and what is right, you will see that they are center-left and center-right in the majority. Of course, we have the Left Party and the Alternative of Germany, but they are not so strong.
Is that where Europe is going as well? These European parliamentary elections coming up, is the center going to hold less and we'll see more movement towards the left and towards the right?
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, the pity is that...
Fortunate in Germany, but unfortunate in Europe.
Yeah, but because the anti-European parties will become stronger in the European Parliament.
Unlike in Germany.
Unlike in Germany, it's not... Of course, these AfD, it's an awful party, but they got in Bavaria, in the regional elections, 11%,
yeah.
30%. It's not what I wish for my country, but it's not a real danger for the country.
It's not Italy.
It's not Italy,
right.
And they are not strong enough to really challenge the country.
You've certainly argued in past years that we should be looking for stronger European security defense commitments. That's important to be done. In this environment, with a comparatively strong Germany, though without Merkel, and a comparatively weaker Europe, would your goal still be Germany needs to help ensure that Europe is strong, or would your goal be closer to Germany needs to do more leading with lots of other countries around the world, and it's less about Europe?
I see two conditions. First, Europe should be unified, and second, we should search for a new alliance, a new form of transatlantic partnership with the US. I mean, the truth is, today we cannot live with Donald Trump, that's true, but the truth is also we cannot live without the US. So we have to search for...
That's tricky.
Yes, but okay, if it would be not tricky, then others could do it. So it's a job for, I think, for political leaders at that time. I don't think that if you look back to the history of Europe, whenever Germany tried to went on his own way, at the end we had war in Europe. For some 100 years in European history, it was always the conflict between the center, us, and the periphery. And for the first time, the European Union was able to organize the difficulties, the conflicts in a very peaceful manner. I mean, Europe is a unique idea. By the way, the Americans were at the cradle of the European Union because they didn't want to send for a third time their kids to a war to Europe. So
we didn't want to do it the second time.
Yes, yeah, but unfortunately, without the help of the Americans, we would today would live under under Hitler's or Stalin's predecessors. So that we are a free country in a free Europe, it's because the US entered in a Second World War. But the Americans, of course, didn't want to do it for the third time. So today, I think we have the responsibility to do our job in a kind of leadership, yes, but never alone, always together with the others. And we should invest, for example, in defense. I'm strictly against 2% of the GDP in the German army, because then we would invest every year 80 billion euros in the German army. France is a nuclear power. They invest 40 billion every year. Imagine what our neighbors would think in 10 years from now, what kind of army is growing in the center of Europe in Germany.
Sigmar Gabriel, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hey Ian, it's Arif. It's been 6 months since the US pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. My only question is the deal still alive?
Hi, Arib. Yeah, it's actually been more than a year since the U.S. has pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, but To be fair, it's only been a few weeks since the Kavanaugh case in Supreme Court, and that feels like a year, so we're all temporarily challenged right now. It is a good question. The climate deal is still alive. The U.S. doesn't get to actually pull out, irrespective of what the president has said, until 2021, January. In other words, after the next president is elected. Could be Trump, in which case it stays out. Could be somebody else. Could change their mind. Also, a lot of American cities and states and corporations are still committed to the deal. And every other country in the world is still aligned with it. Even Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, the new president, he ran on saying that he was going to pull out. Once he's won as president, knows it'd be very controversial within his own country's Congress to actually get that done, has backed away. So as much as climate change is an enormously large challenge that the world is not responding to adequately, we still can say that the climate accord itself is alive.
Hi, my name is Mohamed Souma. I'm from West Africa. I've been dancing like 10 years. Why Trump doesn't care about West Africa?
Mohammed, you seem all bent out of shape over that question. I'm sorry. Not sorry. But no, I mean, he cares a little about West Africa. I mean, in the sense that the United States is engaged in counter-terrorist activities. They've got bases in the so-called guerrilla belt in Central Africa. It's not like Africa doesn't matter, but number one, America First does tend to imply that you pay a little bit less attention to foreign policy and the interests and needs of other countries than the U.S. might historically. Some would say you'd be more honest about it. It's two sides of that equation. Secondly, Africa's entire economy, though we're talking about 1 billion people, is only about 3% of global GDP. So when we talk about Africa, we're still talking about opportunities in the long term, but mostly challenges in the short term, and it gets harder to get people excited, not only the American president, but media organizations and average Americans talking as much about Africa as we'd otherwise like. And now, I've got your puppet regime. Hi, folks. Ian here. As voters headed to the polls earlier this week, we hit the streets with the world's most famous U.S. elections expert for a special report on the state of American democracy.
Join me, Vladimir Putin, as I explore American democracy. Who is this guy? Who is
Hey, puppet, I'm gonna smack you in the face, you punk.
You going to smack me?
You doggone right, I'm gonna smack you in the face. You ready?
How about I poison you? Now let's talk. Are you going to vote?
Hey, yo, vote!
So much anger here. This is great. But I still wanted to understand better how democracy is working on eve of election.
Anybody heard anything about a election? Hi, good morning. Can we talk about the election for a moment, please? Hi, I am looking for young voters to hack. How come it's so hard to vote in America?
People don't take the time to do it.
Yeah, why?
Because they don't think their vote matters.
Yes, I agree. Also, it's hard to vote on a Tuesday. Why don't they open Sunday, like in Russia?
They have a lot of laws that prevent people who have less opportunities or who don't have IDs or things like that because they don't want them to vote.
That sounds great. I like that idea. That sounds wonderful. We could use that back home in Florida.
I had learned a lot. Now it was time to do some fresh field tests.
Okay, I will give 100 rubles to whoever wants to vote for 100 rubles. Okay, who wants 100 rubles to vote for somebody? Okay, I see you smiling. Come here. Come here, Miss Smiles. Are you going to vote here in election next week?
No.
Why not?
Because I can.
Why not?
Because I'm from Portugal.
Well, I'm not from here either, but I also will vote. Look, I voted. I voted like 4 times already.
Nah, man. You only can vote 1 time.
But then why won't you vote?
Oh, man, to me it seemed like it won't count anyway.
So you don't know if the election is legitimate?
Yeah.
Is that new problem or old problem?
It's been a problem for years.
Why do you make it so easy to mess with your election?
because the majority of this country are idiots.
If majority are idiots, isn't democracy a bit of a problem?
Everybody needs to vote, and if everybody, especially people my age, turn out to vote, it'll
but
be good.
You just said majority are idiots.
Anger, apathy, confusion, perfect conditions for me to do what I do best.
Before I get off, I will press all buttons just to be a jerk.
That's our show this week. We'll be right back here next week. Don't you miss it. Please don't miss it. I don't want you to miss it. But in the meantime, if you like what you've seen, check us out on GZEROmedia.com.